Hey guys, it's Video James here coming at you again with more soccer predictions, football predictions, however you want to call it, from wherever country you're from. So, I know it's been 3 weeks since my last video. I was talking about AFCON 2021, the first the qualifying in general. I decided I think the first round of qualifying is pretty obvious. I think it's one of the only things in AFCON that seemed to be obvious was that first round, but now we're actually going to start getting into the hard stuff, and I will actually have to do some first round stuff. Today we're going to start with the CAF, the Confederation African de Football. I believe. I don't speak French, je ne parle pas français. If my roommate were here, he would berate me, because he's French. First round of CAF World Cup 2022 qualifying sees the top 26 teams in Africa automatically get a bye into the second round, aka the real qualifications, the real group qualifyings, whereas the bottom 28 teams will have to go through qualifiers for qualifications, a preliminary round, the first round. This may be a multi-competition video, just for the sake of it. We have in 8 days will be our kickoff for the first ball. Sorry, I'm getting messages. Our kickoff for the first ball for CAF World Cup qualifying. So without further ado, let's run through the groups. First of all, the top 26 nations being Senegal, Tunisia, Nigeria, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Ghana, Cameroon, DR Congo, Ivory Coast, Mali, Burkina Faso, South Africa, Bafana, Guinea, Cabo Verde, Uganda, Zambia, Benin, Gabon, Congo, Madagascar, Niger, Libya, Mauritania, Kenya, and Central African Republic, surprisingly. They all get a bye. They're automatically qualified to the second round. The bottom 28 being Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, Namibia, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Togo, Sudan, Rwanda, Tanzania, Equatorial Guinea, Eswatini, Lesotho, Comoro, Botswana, Burundi, Ethiopia, Liberia, Mauritius, Gambia, I should say, South Sudan, Chad, Sao Tome and Principe, Seychelles, Djibouti, Somalia, and Eritrea. So those two were put into pots, or those 28 teams were put into pots. The top half were put in pot 1, the bottom half were put in pot 2. So even though Lesotho gets by 2 ranks, they're still in pot 1, whereas Comoros, who was 2 ranks behind in 146, was put into pot 2. Funnily enough. So the following matches were drawn and announced. I couldn't do a reaction to the drawing because I did not speak French, so I had to wait for Wikipedia, and even so, I've been lazy. Ethiopia versus Lesotho. Ethiopia down in the dumps lately, Lesotho rising up despite its low rank at 144. Ethiopia is ranked at 150. Now that's not a huge divide, and okay, sorry, got a very important message on my computer and I had to look at it. Lesotho seems like not the team to beat. Absolutely not the team to beat. If anything, the team to beat here would be Zimbabwe, and the team that Zimbabwe's up against probably won't. Well, it's a snowball's chance in hell. Lesotho, we saw them do decently during qualifiers for AFCON this year, and a lot of people were like, well, they got a shot, and they did. They had their shot, and they performed admirably given the circumstances, whereas Ethiopia, they themselves were given, I want to say a freebie, because they were basically given victories over Sierra Leone, a country that by all rights should not lose to Ethiopia, but since they were disqualified at the time, Ethiopia got the points, and Ethiopia just had to try and survive a group with two much better teams, which They obviously did not. They got creamed. Lesotho, I'm seeing during the first leg, they'll be in Ethiopia. That might be a tough match, but at the end of the day, I'm thinking 1-3 in favor of Lesotho. And then during the second leg, it's probably going to be a 4-0 win against Ethiopia, giving Lesotho a very obvious bye into the second round. The second game, these are not in order of when the games actually begin, but just the list that Wikipedia has for me. Somalia versus Zimbabwe. Now, I'm not going to bore you. Zimbabwe is going to destroy Somalia. Somalia ranked 202nd, tied for last place in Africa with Eritrea. There's a reason for that. They're not good. They haven't ever been good. There's reasons why they're not good, and they're sad reasons, but Somalia, I don't see them even scoring a goal against Zimbabwe. I think it's impossible for Zimbabwe to move on. Eritrea versus Namibia. Namibia came in with a very disappointing AFCON performance. A lot of people were predicting that they weren't going to do that well, and they were kind of given a very easy group during qualifications, and they got through that way, and even then they scraped by during those games. Eritrea, meanwhile, if anybody remembers World Cup qualifying back in 2015 all the way up to 2017 for Africa, there were headlines making the news with Eritrea because Eritrea, despite winning their first game, started losing all their games afterwards, even though they beat what was considered, at the time, a difficult opponent. And it became clear that the reason for that was because the Eritrean national team players were fleeing after their games were over. They were finding ways out of any responsibilities, because Eritrea, a nation that does not allow for freedom of speech and has multiple other Human Development Index issues, saw multiple players flee, and therefore, despite a strong opener by Eritrea, they could not recover because they lost all their players, they lost their coaches, they lost their managers. Namibia is going to take this quite easily. Now, a little bit of a tougher one to predict would be Burundi versus Tanzania. Both nations had appeared in the African Cup of Nations. Both nations had a disappointing showing. Granted, Burundi lost to a nation that would end up going to the quarterfinals. They lost to Nigeria, who'd end up going to the semifinals. And they played against, I can't remember the third nation they played against, but that's inconsequential. They lost all their games. Tanzania, meanwhile, struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled the entire time. It wasn't a matter of they were put up against giants. In fact, if we look at those groups that they had, like I said, Burundi went up against Madagascar, Nigeria, and Guinea. All of those nations went to the quarterfinals or farther. Tanzania went up against Kenya. Not too difficult of a team. They did end up scoring 2 goals against them, but lost 3-2, which was, I want to say, sad for them because they were in the lead after the 6th minute, and then they were drawn up against with Kenya in the 39th, and then immediately after, Samata scored a 40th minute goal to make Tanzania go, oh, we're okay. But then Omolo and Olunga just came in. Tanzania probably doesn't deserve to be in the preliminaries, but they're in that situation now. God, my hair's so wet. Shouldn't do a shower right before a video. But personally, if you ask me, I'm going to have to say probably Burundi, surprisingly enough, to go on. Burundi put up a good fight, all things considered. Tanzania with a -6 goal differential. They did go up against Algeria and Senegal, very difficult opponents, of which Algeria scored 3 goals against them. Senegal scored 2 goals against them. Burundi leaving with a -4. Burundi managed to protect from 1 goal. Only Igalo scored a goal in their match. Burundi also only had 1 goal from Madagascar, from very difficult name. I know Nomen Janahri and Andrea Matsinorio. They're very difficult names. And then 2 goals from Guinea. Again, some very difficult teams, and Tanzania had to go up against the finalists and the semifinalists. But at the end of the day, they still couldn't perform against Kenya. Whereas Burundi were given a tough go of it right at the beginning. I'm going to have to say, probably Burundi going through. Very tight, probably a draw in their first game in Burundi. Maybe 1-1 in their second leg. In their first game it would probably be like a 1-0 victory over Tanzania. In the second leg it would be a 1-1 draw, and they'd just get through on aggregate. So we'll see. Djibouti versus Eswatini, another easy game to predict. Djibouti somehow is considered better than Somalia, probably because they can keep a consistent team every once in a while. But Djibouti is, if you're from Djibouti, you'd know that one city holds almost the entire population. Only 3% of the population lives outside of the capital, and they're not playing soccer. They're absolutely not. And the people living in the city don't have really much time for soccer. We can look at the Djibouti national team right now, and I can tell you how many of them are outside of the domestic league. Fun fact. We have coaches. Their most recent coach is Julian Met, who joined in April. They used to have a Mauritanian guy. This guy, Julian Met, does stuff for the did stuff for the Republic of Congo. Not high tier Congolese teams, aside from actually one that is kind of impressive, AS Otaho, Association Sportive Otaho, located in Oyo, became the Congo Premier League champion in 2018 when he was manager then. So, not too bad, but even so, you know who we're talking about here. We're talking about Djibouti against Eswatini, Swaziland. And Swaziland actually made it to qualifications for AFCON, for this year's AFCON, at the very least, and Djibouti did not. Eswatini is probably a clear favorite. 4-0 victory at home for Eswatini. 3-0 victory against Djibouti at Djibouti. Botswana versus Malawi. This game is a little bit harder to predict. Botswana falling a little bit. I'm kind of with Football Pharaoh on this one. Probably going to go for Malawi here. Don't really know the teams too well. I saw Botswana perform in qualifiers. They weren't that impressive. They haven't been impressive their results haven't really been that impressive for a while. So I'm going to have to go with the lake country of Malawi. Botswana just doing a nosedive all the time. Not really... Oh my goodness. They did appear in the group stages of the African Cup of Nations once back in 2012, whereas Malawi, they've appeared twice, once in 1984, once in 2010. That's really all I've got to work with here. I'm probably going to put Malawi ahead of Botswana. Maybe small games, 2-0, 1-0, 2-1, 1-0. That's the kind of games I'm looking at, but basically wins for Malawi all around. Angola versus the Gambia. I think Angola is going to squash the Gambia. The Gambia is trying, but Angola probably shouldn't be in the preliminary round because they are good, but I understand they had to cull everybody left and right so that we could get through qualifications for the World Cup faster before it shows up. Angola is just an obvious winner here. Liberia versus Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone took a nosedive because of their disqualification during qualifiers for AFCON and what have you. This was all over their government getting involved in the Football Association, which was considered a violation of FIFA regulations. Liberia hitting hard times. These are probably the two teams to look out for. This to me would probably be the most exciting of the preliminary round matches. Maybe the games with Guinea-Bissau and Comoros, and and Rwanda, no, not even Rwanda, but the games with Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea and Mozambique might be exciting, but Liberia versus Sierra Leone is a seller. It's going to be great. I'm going to love it. I'm going to love watching it. I'm going to make sure to watch it when I can. But if it were Liberia at home for the first leg, probably a dramatic 2-1 finish. Then Sierra Leone at home, probably a 2-1 finish. Going into however AFCON decides to settle that, whether it's through penalties or whether it's through a third game on neutral ground like they did with Egypt and Algeria. But I do not see this being an easy one. I do think Sierra Leone will move on over Liberia, just because Sierra Leone doesn't really deserve to be in the position it's in right now. But Liberia probably going to lose to Sierra Leone, in my opinion. Mauritius versus Mozambique. Do I even need to talk? Mozambique should win this. Sao Tome and Principe versus Guinea-Bissau. Come on. They showed up to AFCON. They performed. So did Mozambique against Mauritius. They're island nations, and island nations historically don't do well, even in Africa. When it's wild, it's a crazy set of circumstances. Some island nations, particularly one that I've been keeping my eye on for a couple of years, is doing better. The only reason why I kind of keep my eye on is because I'm very Arab focused, as it were. But Sierra Leone is the team that I think is going to go through. Mozambique is going to beat Mauritius. Guinea-Bissau is going to beat Sao Tome and Principe. It's almost a done deal. Sao Tome and Principe has a chance, but it's a snowball's chance in a fire pit. South Sudan versus Equatorial Guinea, another situation where maybe Equatorial Guinea shouldn't be in, considering Equatorial Guinea's abilities. The only Spanophone nation in Africa, if I'm not mistaken. They probably will beat South Sudan. South Sudan really did not have an easy go of it during qualifiers. Equatorial Guinea had a better go of it. Equatorial Guinea has skill, it has players. South Sudan, not so much. Comoros versus Togo. If you've watched my previous videos, I've talked about how there's Ghana, then Benin, then Togo, and Ghana and Benin are generally widely regarded as, oh, these are the teams. Like, these are some of the really good teams in Africa. Ghana being the best, Benin being a very decent middle power when it comes to football. And they're next to Cote d'Ivoire, and they're next to Nigeria, and that West African. It's like a powerhouse of football teams. Togo, not so much. Why, how, where, when? Not easy to tell you why. I don't know much about Togolese history, geography, football, none of that. All I know is that I see their results, and I consistently see them performing bottom of the rung. They're not really doing that well, and that's surprising considering they're 128th. They're ahead of Equatorial Guinea, Tanzania, Rwanda, Sudan. But that's just it. They're middling. Comoros, on the meanwhile, even though they're considered right at the top of Pot 2 in 146, right above Botswana at 147. They're improving. We saw them draw with Cameroon, which was godly. We've seen Comoros perform admirably these past few years, and I think of all the teams, Togo, despite being a little bit difficult for them in comparison to a nation like Eswatini, Lesotho, Tanzania, Malawi, I think they got a really lucky draw with Togo. They would have been better off if they were playing against Sudan or Rwanda, but Togo was a good draw for them. I'm going for Comoros. Maybe narrow, maybe not. Maybe a 2-0 victory at home in Comoros National Stadium, which, if you've seen it, it's almost like a park. And at Togo, probably a 1-0 victory for Comoros. We'll see. It all comes down to it really comes down to skill. You could argue with me and say, well, look at what Comoros did for the Internacional Cup. And yeah, the Comoros national team was made of completely domestic players. Togo kind of has a diversity no matter what competition they're playing, but also keep in mind a lot of their players play in Ligue 2, Ligue 2 of France leagues, France football leagues, and they usually come for competitions like this, being qualifiers. They came for AFCON, and it paid off immensely. They're going to come for World Cup qualifiers, without a doubt. And then 2 more matches left. Sudan versus Chad. Come on, man. Have you ever seen Chad move on from anything in Africa? I have never in my life seen Chad do well. They're not good. They've never gone to an AFCON. They've never qualified for a World Cup. They usually get battered left and right. They have had a few wins every once in a while, but not in recent memory. I think one of their biggest wins was against Sao Tome. It was a 5-0 win, which is not bad. It's not bad, but it's really not good. Yeah, Sudan is just the obvious favorite. Sudan might as well. They do have the North African football tradition, despite not necessarily being North African, depending on how you look at it. Even though they're in a rut for many reasons politically, the Sudanese players should still be able to perform at the level to defeat Chad of all nations. If they don't, that's a real bloody nose in the face of Sudan. And if Sudan has trouble or draws with Chad, they've got a lot of problems that they need to fix. But they won't, so. Seychelles versus Rwanda. This one's probably one of the hardest to predict. Seychelles and Rwanda. Not really. I'm lying to myself. Rwanda's probably going to win this. Rwanda is big on football. If you've seen the This Is Football docuseries that they've released, their first episode's about Rwanda, funnily enough. It's a very beautiful episode. I encourage you all to, if you have Amazon Prime or something, to watch it. You might learn something. I certainly learned something about African football after watching that. Rwanda probably going to beat Seychelles. Seychelles, the 4th worst team in Africa. That's with good reason. They're a tiny little islet nation. Not even as big as Comoros, not as big as Sao Tome and Principe, not as big. Well, there's a lot of people that live there, but land-wise, very small. No, I don't see Seychelles doing that well. I'm sorry, Rwanda can beat Seychelles. Seychelles managed... Oh, God, what did Seychelles do during qualifiers? I can't even remember. 2019 AFCON qualifiers. They were there. I remember it very clearly that they were there. Let's see here. Seychelles were in here, right? I swear I remember seeing... Oh, no, wait. Oh, I accidentally opened up African Cup of Nations. I want qualification. Thank you. That threw me off for a second. Yeah, the bottom 3 nations had no pot, being Chad, Eritrea, Somalia. And Seychelles were put into pot 4. They were not in the preliminary round for AFCON. But they were in here. They were in here, and what did they do? They came in last. I remember that very clearly. Yep, they came in last with a negative 22 goal differential. They scored 3 goals in all 6 of their games. They got a draw somewhere. Who did they get? They got a draw against South Africa, funnily enough. Impressive. Meanwhile, let's look at Rwanda. Rwanda, meanwhile, I remember them being here too. Rwanda were in there. They had 2 points. Let's recap. Seychelles had to go against, admittedly, some tough teams, being Libya, South Africa, and Nigeria. And Rwanda went up against Central African Republic, Ivory Coast, and Guinea. They drew 2 games, lost 4 of them. -7. 2 of those teams in that group they were in were still difficult. They didn't even have a third of the amount of goals scored against them as Seychelles did, which is terrifying. That's scary. Well, I suppose they did. So overall, but their goal differential was not even a third of what Seychelles was. And to just wrap up this video that very few people are probably going to care about, Rwanda is probably going to take down Seychelles quite handily. Agree, disagree. If you guys have some insight in African football, because like one of my Nigerian viewers once said, do you even know anything about African football? And I said, admittedly, it's hard to know a lot considering, like, I could tell you a lot about European football. I can tell you San Marino's, this is why, Malta and Greece and Serbia and Armenia and Georgia, Azerbaijan, Baku. But when it comes to African football, when we don't even get televised events for half of the matches, it's a little bit shaky. But I'm very confident in the predictions I just gave. Most of them gave them to the top higher tier. Lesotho, I believe, yes, Lesotho in the higher tier, Zimbabwe in the higher tier, Namibia in the higher tier, Burundi, I think, is one of the ones in the lower tier. I gave that one to them. Eswatini in the higher tier, Malawi in the higher tier, Angola in the higher tier, Sierra Leone far and above in the higher tier, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, and Sudan and Rwanda. Very few in the lower tier I had advancing. It's not impossible for any team in the lower tier unless you're Somalia and Eritrea, but it's very unlikely. And Liberia probably had the best chance despite being in the lower tier, but they were drawn against Sierra Leone. I would have put them above even if they played against Zimbabwe, but since it's Sierra Leone, I'm way less confident in their abilities to move on to the second round. But at the end of the day, this doesn't really matter much, because most of the time, preliminary nations rarely make it to the World Cup. Preliminary nations also rarely make it to AFCON. It was just a miracle that Madagascar managed to not only go and get to the quarterfinals, but c'est la vie, that's French for something. And before making this video too long, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please comment, subscribe, like the video. I'd really appreciate it. If you don't like the video, I mean, I'd appreciate any attention. But I'd also appreciate hearing your disagreements and hearing what you guys think I could do better. I hear a lot of arguments going on in the AFC World Cup qualifiers, and those kick off in a couple weeks too, don't they? Oh boy. And I've already given my predictions for those, I believe. Yes, I did. But that's got to be exciting. Yeah, that starts as early as the 5th of September, I believe. Yeah, the next match, I believe, starts in the 5th of September. Africa starts in the 2nd of September. We're not going to be seeing anything from CONMEBOL until March. We haven't seen anything for Europe. We have no idea when they're going to start, but we know they're going to finish in 2021, so we're thinking Nations League is going to tie into that. We're waiting on CONCACAF, because they still got to do their Nations League, and the OFC, which I'm not even going to bother doing a video for. If it's not New Zealand, something's wrong, for their qualification. It takes 3 years for them to finish their qualifications, by the way. It's so far apart every match. But absolutely, I do believe that this is going to be an exciting World Cup season. Like, probably one of the most exciting. I think Qatar is going to be a very strange World Cup. not just because of location and the host nation, but because we have, I think we've passed a threshold in football history where all of a sudden everything's starting to flip on its head. Since 2010, I believe, since 2010, I think every champion has been European. Actually, since 2006 it was Italy. Yeah, hold on. We have been seeing a lot of European dominance, which isn't that crazy, all things considered. Most of the teams that go to the World Cup are European. Only 4 to 5 nations that are South American go there. And we've only ever seen nations win from either South America or from Europe. But let's see here. Yeah, we had Spain in 2010. We had France last year. And we had Italy in 2006. Yeah, I remember that. Germany in 2014. The last time a non-European nation won the World Cup was in 2002. And now we're having a World Cup in Asia. If you guys don't remember, and I remember very clearly, in 2002, back when the World Cup was in South Korea and in Japan, we had South Korea coming fourth. We had Turkey coming third. That home field advantage. And remember, the Confederations Cup, South Korea was bottomed out right at the beginning, and they were knocked off during the Confederations Cup in 2001, and then all of a sudden they came in fourth place. I don't know. I think it's going to be exciting. I think there's going to, there's going to be some iconic moments just by taking a World Cup into Asia. I think if we were to take a World Cup into Africa, we'd probably see very similar things. As much as I want to see Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, or Morocco, Spain, and Portugal host the 2030 World Cup, this is one of the few times I'll say I hope Uruguay gets the hosting rights, because it's going to be the 100-year anniversary. It should be there. It probably should. But we're going to see some impressive stuff going on in the upcoming World Cup, and I hope the qualifiers are just proof of that. And I hope y'all are excited as I am. And without further ado, I'm going to end the video after all my rambling. And thank you for watching. Have a good one. I'm going to talk about CONCACAF later. Bye-bye.